Hi, Dana. It is so nice to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. Always lovely to see you.
So we're going to talk today about the amazing workshops that you run, but I will set the context first, how it relates to the upskilling program that I'm rolling out in 2023, and just in general, my latest passion. And my latest passion is to reduce stress in corporate America. And I thought about it. It's a good one, right?
Love that. Yes,
Um,
totally aligned. Yes. Mhm.
And the way I think about it is I talk to folks who understand neuroscience, who can speak the science speak as far as how stress prevents innovation, how stress affects us. That's kind of one side for those who still need proof that we're not the most creative folks when we're stressed out. But then there's another half where, say you're bought in and you know that stress is causing lack of innovation. And in general, we're talking about health and all kinds of different things. And folks that can help us reduce that stress. And this is where you come in. So I'm going to give you the floor so that you can introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Thank you. Well, this topic is just incredible. I've also just been really engrossed in a book titled Body Keeps the Score, which you might be aware of, with tons of neuroscience research. So I'm happy to geek out on that, even
Okay.
though I'm not personally a scientist, and I've just been experimenting with what creativity does for people from the perspective of an arts practitioner and an educator. So first and foremost, I am an artist who specializes in landscapes and recording places for people that are really memorable and important to them, and bring them to that sense of wonder and awe, back to childhood, back to happy moments in their lives. I am also an educator, and as part of that, I have a studio that is catered towards adults and kids, lots of corporate workshops, like you had mentioned, and did a TED Talk specifically on the topic of using creativity to fight burnout, which was incredibly well received. I have performed the talk 5 times, I think now, in different settings, and used that in my own courses as well. And lastly, I started right in the midst, or right in the beginning of COVID, I launched a fashion line. So that is my kind of third product and collection in terms of what I branch out towards. But I would absolutely love to talk about overwhelm and stress and anxiety. I think it's exceptionally important to bring this to the forefront for people who are not aware of the different methods of bringing yourself back into balance, but also to talk about the fact that even those women in tech who have dealt a lot with that say, oh my God, I don't have a creative bone in my body. I don't know how this would
Guilty. I
help
used to
me,
actually
right?
say that a lot.
Yes, yes. I think that was the first thing that you said to me when you came into one of the workshops. For them to recognize that creativity is in all of us, and it's just a matter of accessing it and finding a way that brings your particular, very individual creativity out. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And so to me, the burnout, I mean, that's huge. And even though when I talk about, upskilling women in tech, and I do talk a lot about doubts and overcoming doubts in our career. And that is the topic that I'm preparing for a potential TEDx talk, right? So it's doubts. How can we look at doubts in a different way and overcoming them, and really reaching the life worth living and full of potential and just feeling fulfilled. But there's another side, and I'm speaking at a conference on January 5th, and it is about reducing stress in corporate America. And I talk a lot about the how, because in the second book, which the launch took in your studio, which was awesome, But there's 7 different areas that we look at, and we look at a lot of it at the how. How do you reduce stress in corporate America, right? Because a lot of the stress is causing by conflict. What causes conflict? And so it's a different area. But another angle is when we talk about digital transformations, like in my world, we do talk a lot about innovation, and we talk a lot about creativity. And I don't know about you, but if I'm stressed out about anything or pissed off about something, there's truly zero creativity. And when I say like nothing, it's because you're wasting your brain cycles towards something other than innovation. Right? You're worried about things. Someone said something. There's no alignment, and so that's causing people just not understanding which direction to take something. And so when you kind of like use up those brain cycles, there's like nothing left to actually create. So I found that I am the most creative is when I am doing something active. I can be snowshoeing up the hill, I can be walking, I could be sitting in the jacuzzi by myself, whatever that may be. And I also find that the workshops like yours, when you start drawing something or thinking how to make something, I don't know, better,
Out of
or
nothing.
what
Yeah.
is it?
Making something out of nothing.
Making
Huge.
something out of nothing, right? Your brain, right, relaxes, and it gets into a state where you can actually think in a very different way. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the kind of workshops that you've done in the corporate world and the outcomes and just people reactions? Because people often resist. That's another thing that I focus on, resistance to change, and I've done keynotes on that topic as well. So number one, kind of the outcomes, right? Like what are the learning objectives when you go in and you teach your workshops? And number two, talk about like people resisting your workshops, and then maybe how you get them to reconsider and be open to them.
Sure. I think I'll start from the second question and then move to the first, if that's all right. There is, and I think there's a connection between resistance and doubts, because for people in high tech, and I've done tons of workshops for Google folks and Facebook and other companies in the high tech world. For a lot of them, they haven't done anything creative since elementary school. So this is so out of their comfort zones that the resistance is just sky high. And the number one thing that I say to them when they start and they come in with comments like, I don't know what I'm doing here, and I don't know why I signed up for this, I say, imagine that you are 4 years old again, and you just learned how to do basic shapes. And we start from there, and that's all you need to know. And immediately when you bring people back to that state of being a little kid who wants to explore and experiment and isn't afraid of all of these preconceived notions and things that they had learned over their lifetimes in terms of what they're good at, what they're not good at, there is so much more excitement. Like I can see their fingers twitching in anticipation. I can see more color in their faces as they get into it, and that typically happens about the 20-minute mark. And there's research behind that too, scientific research behind the 20-minute mark. And they become a lot more social and talkative with their peers. And it is such an incredible team building exercise, because here they are, they're using the other side of their brain. And to geek out just for a little bit, what I was particularly fascinated with is that, the myth about the right side of the brain, left side of the brain is absolutely true. And what's even more interesting is that our left side of the brain is our logical, practical language side, right? The right side of the brain is our emotional, visual, creative side. And that side, the right side of the brain, starts developing when we're still in the womb. And it develops way before the left side of the brain. And all of these scans that neuroscientists are doing these days with people who've gone through trauma or experiencing PTSD, which on some level, not to minimize what folks might be going through, but to some level, I think we all are after 2 years of
Right.
the pandemic. What happens when somebody has been exposed to trauma is their left side of the brain gets shut down. So, comments like, even back in the days when Shakespeare was writing about this, this is so horrible that I don't have words for this, right? So our right side of the brain lights up and is extremely active because we're experiencing everything through visual stimuli, through smells and sounds and kind of textural qualities, tactile, right? And we can't put it into words. So this ability to access yourself as a child who was totally carefree and was able to express himself or herself in visual terms is extremely balancing, because not only are you giving a break to the side of the brain that you use a lot more on the daily basis, but you're rebuilding your recovery system. Because honestly, this is a huge pet peeve of mine, the fact that in schools these days, where they're so catered towards teaching towards STEM, and they forget the fact that it should actually be STEAM. And kids don't have outlets to express all of their pent up emotions and frustrations and anxiety. And then they're growing up to become adults who have no idea how to express and how to process everything that's going on. And I think especially now with the recovery process for all of us after the pandemic and the added hours that we now have with remote work and the burnout that everybody's experiencing, it is so much more important to have those tools. So getting back to your number one question, right? What are the goals and what people come out of these
Yeah, the
workshops
learning
with,
objectives. Yeah, when
right?
they
The
go
learning
in.
objectives. It's funny that you mentioned that what you talk about is doubts, as well as those fears of getting out of the comfort zone and being resistant, right? Because the whole creative process is usually a mirror of what we might be struggling with in real life. And it forces you to be in doubt. It forces you to be out of your comfort zone. It forces you to experiment and not be resistant. And what I'm seeing a lot is whatever issues people have in real life, those are the results that they get in their artistic workshops as well. So there's definitely, and I wrote a book about, my first book was about the correlations between the art making practice and our psyche. So for instance, those people who typically find themselves on a piece of paper when they're in the midst of a workshop, struggling with not being able to get out of the center, they are the same people who are not able to see the big picture in their business life.
That's fascinating.
That are like in the forest for the trees, right? And they can't really see what's going on, right? Or those who are struggling with the imposter syndrome are the ones who are afraid to use that different medium or try something new. And it coming out of these workshops, it shows them, oh, here's what I need to be paying attention to. And I think it'd be interesting to, and I'm actually setting up a bunch of these panels and potentially workshops for the public, where we can measure at certain intervals, what were you feeling like before you went in? What are you feeling like 10 minutes after? And it'd be interesting to get back to these people, 6 months after the workshop and see if they're seeing any changes, if they're seeing any improvements. But I do have quite a few people signing up again and again. So I think
That's a
that's a
good
really
sign.
great sign of the fact that some wheels are turning and some things are changing.
So it also, I imagine, people are vulnerable when they don't feel comfortable, right? I mean, we talk about vulnerability in leadership, and so I would imagine that if leaders embrace it and they go into this workshop together with their people and they position as, listen, I also feel very uncomfortable, but let's just be open-minded and kind of go with it and see what we can learn about each other. I am curious if by the end of the workshop, by kind of looking, do you reveal the fact that this particular person is very analytical and paying a lot of attention to this one particular part and can't get out of the center? Like, do you actually connect those bits and pieces so that people are self-aware?
I do, yes. So we usually have a 10-minute critique at the end of each session. And I don't go around pointing fingers and saying, hey, you're the one who's stuck in the center and you're the one who's not able to experiment. But I bring that up. Whatever you found, we talk about what worked in the workshop, what was the most challenging thing in the workshop. And then I tell them that this is just food for thought. Whatever you were struggling with is most likely something that is a dilemma for you in the rest of your business life and personal life.
A little bit of self-reflection is
Yes.
always a wonderful thing. I'm a big fan of that. I remember, and I will share this with you. Now, I think I'm a very confident person and I am open to learning and I embrace new things all the time, hopefully, right? Like I lead by example, I'm sticking to this story. And I talk a lot about doubts because growing up, I was not considered like the smartest kid on the block. And as you know, in former USSR, soft skills were not really that valid. They weren't considered a skill. So I was kind of growing up thinking I don't really have like any natural talent in anything. And so that's why I'm so passionate about upskilling women, because I see so much of that doubt in women specifically. I mean, everyone has it, but women specifically. And so that's why I care about it a lot. I'm very passionate about this topic. When I went into your workshop, and I remember I came in and I did say that I'm not very creative, which is like bizarre, right? I mean, how can you not be creative? You create content, you write books, like, okay, like there's just no way. You can't say that even sentence, like, because we're all creative in our own ways. But what was going through my mind, and I remember because a very close friend of mine who I love very much was also sitting in that workshop and I've known her for years. And what was going through my mind was I came in and because I was a bit late, I looked at what she had and my thought was, I don't want to embarrass myself, right? Like, I know she thinks very highly of me now. I don't want to disappoint her. I don't want her to think that I really suck at this. Like, it was really going through
There's
my
the
mind,
constant, yeah.
right? Like, we're
I
so
totally hear
afraid.
you.
And I always say, I preach, I say very loudly, like, I'm not afraid to fail. Like, I'm all for experimenting. But there I am feeling like I don't want to get embarrassed in front of this person that I have so much respect and I know she respects me. So I know many people think like that. And so what do you say to folks? And I do remember what you said to me, but I want you to actually say it in this forum, to calm people down and make sure that they truly can embrace and benefit from the workshop.
Don't you hate that about women? Gosh.
Yep.
I think the reason why we're struggling so much is because there is that incredible self-criticizing voice that is so potent. And that voice gets louder when we start comparing ourselves to everyone around us and and judging. She might be better in this and I might be better at that, but in this particular situation I'm just way out of my comfort zone, right? What I say to people is part of this approach, this method that I had talked about during my TED Talk as well, which was an acronym SPARK. What we do in the beginning of each class, and that is part of the strategy in terms of getting out of your head and truly being there, right, in that particular space, that particular time, your particular mood, is we do a breathing exercise. So S in Spark is for staying present, and that is about a 5-minute exercise that kind of puts you there. Letter P in Spark is for paying attention to the different corners of the page. We talk about the composition, we kind of talk about forms and shapes and colors, but it's also paying attention to where you are emotionally. And letter A is for allowing yourself to play, but I think the most important letter is letter R, which is releasing the end result, because that is when comparison comes in. When you are, we've just been taught as a culture to focus so much on what is my end result going to be? What is my goal for today? Why did I come here? And that was one of your first questions, right? Is what are the outcomes that we should be expecting? And for innovation, it has to be the opposite. You have to be open to whatever result you get. You just want to be present for the actual process and the journey. And also letter K in Spark is being kind to yourself, because you are in that very unfamiliar environment. You're doing something that is just totally not you, and you haven't done since you were, I don't know, 8 or 10 years old. And it's okay that it's going to look different from your neighbor. And I don't remember what I said that night, but I'm curious now that you mentioned it, because I'm totally spacing out on that. I don't know if it was the same thing or not. What I love about reading Eastern philosophies and also reading a lot about Aboriginals in Australia is that, and I know that Steve Jobs was really talking about that a lot as well, is the fact that in those cultures, they pay so much more attention to intuition, and to intuition guiding it and making it stronger, which is exactly what the number one component is of any innovation and artistic practice, right? And when we do that, when we really tune in to our heart and to our brains and let go of the end result, that is when magic happens. It's just a matter of turning that off and slowly but surely teaching that intuitive voice to be louder.
When I asked you when I was there, I said, am I doing it right? And you said there's no right or wrong. And I do remember thinking, man, I teach that. I preach that every single day in my world. Right? When teams are estimating in a certain way, or they're organizing their work in a certain way, or because there are certain frameworks that I teach in my day-to-day outside of this upskilling program. And I get that question all the time. And I said, listen, it's a journey. We're experimenting. It might work for you. It might not. Let's just kind of, experiment. But people always want to know if they're right or if they're wrong, as if it's like, because I don't know, because I think we're maybe trying to please. I know I'm a people pleaser. I know that about myself. I've been working on it now for quite a few years. And I think I do remember, like, well, I don't want to disappoint you. Maybe you have certain expectations and now I'm doing it wrong.
See, and that is exactly what I'm saying in terms of the art practice mirroring what you might be struggling with in real life, because it's one of those things that we are focused on things where we need to work through the most, right? Ourselves. So we need to be drinking our own Kool-Aid, so to speak, right? And really believing that there's no right or wrong. And I don't know if I told you that story during the workshop, but I think it's a beautiful story that I'd love to share here. And that is that in China, calligraphers, when they perfect a particular symbol, it takes years and years and years. And it's this really fast movement that originates from their shoulders. And it takes, I don't know, 10, 20 years to get that right. And what they say is, because they get a lot of mistakes, inevitably, And the things that cost the most from the collector's market are the mistakes, by the way. They say there's no such thing as mistakes in art. It's all a matter of what you turn it into. And I think that is the case for anything, really, if we're able to embrace that and internalize it, that wherever you are in life, it's not because you effed up somewhere. It's because you're exactly where you're meant to be. And you got there at that particular time because that is exactly how you needed to get there.
It's fascinating. And it's also fascinating to me how it's all connected. If you think about it, right? Like we're from different worlds, right? We have different professions, but all of it is just comes down to our brains, and it's all extremely connected. We have a workshop in kind of my world for, to innovate. There's something called design thinking. And with design thinking, you get people from all the different expertise, and you think about how you would solve a particular pain point for a customer. And it could be a new feature, it could be whatever that may be, it could be a brand new product. And the way we do this is we do have all the people working individually and in small groups, and they just go at it. They design screens, they design buttons, they like the way that they would solve it. And now I don't teach that particular workshop. I'm not an expert in design thinking, but I've worked very, very closely with someone who is. And so I got a chance to co-facilitate, help this person to run this workshop on quite a few occasions. And it is just fascinating how many times people would just say, excuse me, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? And then I go in and I ask you, am I doing it right? So I guess it's a major pain point for people to make sure that the end result is exactly like someone else is expecting. And
I think it's that need for external validation, right? We're so self-aware, and self-aware in relationship to the society, in relationship to the energy, in the room, or and we're so afraid that there won't be that external validation, and because in some areas we might be a lot less comfortable, right? Like yourself being in my world, it starts screaming louder and louder, that self-confidence comes after a certain amount of exposure and
skill, right?
skill.
Yeah, that's another
Yeah.
thing that I talk a lot about, that the connection between self-confidence, doubts, and actually obtaining the skill. Because you obtain the skill, you become more confident, and maybe those doubts go away.
Or maybe they don't.
Or maybe they don't. Yeah.
Right? Because you can have all kinds of accolades and still suffer from imposter syndrome and still feeling like you're not getting enough compliments and accolades, and it's just never enough. And I think a lot of it has to do with the culture that we've been brought up in, and I know that's the case in a lot of sections of the world, is this method of raising kids with the not enoughness. It's never good enough. And once it's been internalized from the time you were, I don't know, 4 or 5, it's really tough to get away from that and to say to yourself, whatever I do today is just fine.
It's interesting you mentioned cultures, because what I noticed is people that were born in the United States, women, because I've mentored many women over the years. So the ones that are in like their mid 40s and 50s, they still have that, even though they were born here. So it's also the generation. I think generation now, right? They're more self-aware, and there is a lot of praise. One might debate maybe too much at times, but that's a topic for a different podcast. And so, yeah, you're right. I have met women who are absolutely excellent at their jobs, just excellent, and still doubt themselves. So then how do you go about that? Do you just make peace with the fact that you're not self-confident, or any thoughts on that?
I think you make peace with the fact that it's never going to be perfect. And that's just okay. As long as you're doing the best you can on that particular day, that's all you can do. You can't control the world, you can't control the circumstances, but you can control yourself. And when you start appreciating yourself just for the fact that you're there, right? That took a lot of guts to be there in the atmosphere where you are completely out of your comfort zone. The fact that we're allowing ourselves to do that is self-love, and having more of those acts of self-love, I think, brings our self-confidence up higher and higher. Another element in that book that I'm going through, where body keeps the score, is talking about methods of getting out of stress and burnout and what some of those solutions might be. And they talk about kind of treating the brain from top to bottom or bottom up. And top to bottom is really using our body functions like breath work, right? And teaching yourself how to be mindful and being here, meditation, to just appreciate today. And the other element is what I'm doing, and coming at it from another side, giving you strategies from the completely different side of the brain that will balance you out when you're feeling out of balance. And when you can combine both of those in one workshop, it's giving you really incredible tools for that sense of, I know who I am, I know where I'm going, and I'm confident, and I love myself for the fact that I'm trying my best.
I love that. I love that. There was one last thing, and then we'll probably wrap it up. So there's this, I forget the name of that book, but I remember reading it and it spoke to me. The fact that, how about embracing feeling uncomfortable, right? So it's not like pushing through your discomfort zone, but getting used to the fact that you're uncomfortable and it being okay. So when I talk about kind of getting over the doubts as well, so it's one thing is to be self-aware, right? It's key. It's key to be self-aware, everything that, is happening, and what are the things that bother you, and what are the things that you would want to improve or not improve. Maybe you don't want to get over a certain doubt. Maybe you're fine. Maybe, right? It's okay. But say you do. So if we bring it back, right, to when I shared, I'm talking about kind of getting over the doubts to have a fulfilled life. So first, it's okay, be self-aware, understand what's missing, what's not missing, what you're okay with. But then say there is a larger goal in life and you want to get there. And so then what happens? And so actually, you know what? I will put up this poster back. Hold on, because it was inspired by this thought of embracing uncomfortable to achieve unimaginable. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And it was inspired by the fact that I kind of did a little bit of self-reflection of certain things. It's like, how many times in my life did I feel uncomfortable? And it started like very, very early on. Like taking physics that I was horrible at. And you know what? Okay, it was very uncomfortable, but nothing happened. Like, okay, like I wasn't a genius. Like I didn't get an A+ in that class, but I survived. And then kind of embracing that feeling of uncomfortable and still doing things actually gives you a lot of confidence and allows you to achieve things that you otherwise would think completely unimaginable. So I don't know, I'm still toying with that idea, if it's a good solution to propose or not, but that's kind of what's going through my brain these days.
I think that's huge, and you're definitely onto something. And the funniest thing in my life was also taking a physics class, which I thought was going to be the easiest thing ever because it was titled Why the Sky is Blue. And I thought, as an artist, I should know. So I took the course, and it was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. I think I got a C or a C minus, which is just not being a straight A student. This was not comfortable at all. But in terms of embracing the uncomfortable, that is the only time when you grow, and we're either growing or we're dying. So if you can force yourself, because you're at first cause, right? You're responsible for every single thing in your life. If you can force yourself to do one little thing that is out of your comfort zone, could be an art workshop, could be flying to India to talk to, how many people was it? 500,000?
Quite a few.
Quite a few, right? When you do those things, you prove to yourself that everything is possible. And it just takes those baby steps that get you to larger steps, that get you to even larger steps. And then you look back and you think, oh my God, that's what I'm doing today, is kind of looking back through my goals for this year and reading some notes from a few years ago and thinking all that I wrote happened. Everything that I visualized in the shower, all of those dreams and aspirations, I checked all of them off the list because I saw them as goals. I kept coming back to them, and I kept taking little steps every day.
You took action.
Yeah,
right?
you have
the minimum step that you feel comfortable taking, you take it. Take something large, break it down into small, achievable actions, and they add up eventually.
Yeah. And that is going bringing this back to the art practice, right? That is exactly what we're starting with. You're starting with little shapes like a little kid, and out of those shapes, you're building something bigger and more realistic and more profound, and something that speaks of your individual style. And at the end of each class, everyone is just amazed at how different everyone's creativity is and at how much they were able to accomplish. Because I'm very much against the whole paint night approach where we, make a line from point A to point B and then point B to point C. I think there's no imagination in that whatsoever, or innovation or creativity. But when at the end, the whole team, whether it's virtually or in person, looks at what they were able to accomplish, and the leader says, oh my God, I did not that much better than the person next to me, or maybe the secretary is extremely talented and had no idea. It just brings everyone so much closer together as well. It's such an amazing experience. And then, to bring it home completely, I did this TED Talk back in March, and I've been also thinking a lot about proving things to people and seeking that kind of external validation and getting that scientific data to prove that I'm right. And then my little one, who's 8 years old, has been struggling with anxiety, severe anxiety at school, and she's been working with her guidance counselor. And I get a call from the counselor one day, and this woman has no idea who I am, what I do for a living, anything. And she says, all right, so we've been working with Eliza, and please don't laugh, but the number one strategy that we found that works is for her to draw for 5 minutes every single morning. Right? Talk about full circle. And that made me so much more passionate about truly exploring what creativity is and how we all benefit from it, regardless of what your profession is. I think we all need to have access to something inside of us that gets us to the core of who we are. And that's exactly what that does.
That's beautiful. I don't even know what else we can say. I think we need to wrap it up, because this was kind of like the drop the mic moment.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you so very much. It was pleasure. Like we may be from somewhat different worlds and professions, but we're definitely speaking the same language. So thank you very much. I will add information as far as how you can be reached, and thank you. I'm sure we'll come up with many more topics and do more of this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. And good luck to everyone on battling anxiety
Thank you. And doubts.
and doubts.